Penguin Random House Audio presents The Simulation Hypothesis. An MIT computer scientist shows why AI, quantum physics, and Eastern mystics all agree we are in a video game. By Rizwan Virk. Read for you by Ray Greenley, with the foreword and FAQs read by the author. Note to listeners: this audiobook includes a downloadable PDF which contains illustrations and graphs from the printed book.
For my siblings, both inside and outside of the simulation, Irfan, Samina, Rubina, Furqan, and Adnan. Forward to the second edition. The first edition of this book, The Simulation Hypothesis, was published precisely to the day on the 20th anniversary of the most talked about film of the last year of the 20th century, The Matrix. Perhaps it is not entirely coincidental that I am writing this forward to the second edition on the 25th anniversary of that blockbuster science fiction film, which has become the most recognizable pop culture shorthand for the central thesis of this book, that far from living in a physical world of matter, we live inside a computer-generated reality built on information. This reality can be thought of as either a multiplayer video game or a computer simulation, depending on your orientation. For those listeners who want to waste no time and jump directly into the main arguments of this book, that is, the reasons why, as the original subtitle indicates, I believe that AI, quantum physics, and Eastern mystics all agree we are in a video game, feel free to skip this forward and go right to Chapter 1, Introduction to the Simulation Hypothesis. In this forward, I want to explain why I'm writing a second edition at this time. In the 5 years that have passed since the first edition, artificial intelligence, AI, one of the central pillars supporting my arguments in this book, has progressed unexpectedly quickly. Even the tech pundits who have been predicting AGI, artificial general intelligence, within decades are now feverishly updating their estimates to declare that we will get artificial consciousness on par with humans in only a few years. This may be another case of real life, if we can call it that, mirroring science fiction. In The Matrix, Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, explains to Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, who has just taken the red pill, that AI was perfected sometime in the early 21st century. An unexpectedly popular and universal idea. But first, a little perspective. When I published the first edition, I had no idea that the book would be so popular, becoming a kind of cult classic. I believe that, unlike most cult classics, which appeal to a narrow audience, the reason for the book's success was because it spoke to many different groups of people. From teenagers to their parents, from technology enthusiasts to hardcore scientists, from New Age and holistic practitioners to adherents of traditional religions, from armchair philosophers to professional academics. In emails and in public reviews, readers have called the book everything from a beach read for geeks to a spiritual book that changed my life. Just browsing the contents of this book will reveal that I cover a lot of different subjects. Although some of the most religiously, scientifically minded readers may find it odd that I spend a whole section, Part 3, of this book discussing spirituality, religious concepts, and unexplained phenomena, the breadth of topics covered is deliberate. I am of the firm belief that the simulation hypothesis represents a kind of universal bridge that allows techno-scientific people to be more spiritual in their view of life, and allows spiritual people to be more techno-scientific in their outlook, with neither having to abandon their core ideas about the universe. A point that listeners from all walks of life often made to me was that they had come to similar conclusions, that the universe is some kind of simulation or video game. Yet they were never sure how to articulate this insight without sounding, to put it mildly, off their rocker. This was as true of scientists as it was of those who have had unexplainable spiritual episodes, such as near-death experiences mentioned in Part 3, How Simulation Explains the Unexplainable, the Mystics. All of these disparate groups found that the simulation hypothesis gave them a new vocabulary to use so that their insights were taken more seriously. This was just as true for religious readers who now had a new vocabulary to discuss the cosmology of their sacred scriptures as well. This was particularly true of younger generations, for whom the language of video games is a much more natural way to understand both science and religion. Speaking of younger generations, who grew up not only with computers but with constant immersion in multiplayer video game worlds, they are another group that recognizes the simulation idea intuitively. Some parents even told me that they had bought my book because their children, some as young as tweens, asked them whether we might live inside a video game or simulation. This idea might have sounded absurd to parents from a generation or two ago, when video games were in their infancy, but today the video game industry has become among the largest in the world, with more revenue than the music industry and Hollywood box office combined. Other parents, in a strange twist of fate, told me they initially bought the book to satisfy their own intellectual curiosity, but their teenagers saw the book and commandeered it. I'll admit that I'm tickled to say that any nonfiction book that can get teenagers and parents to fight over who reads it first might just be onto something. How and why I came to write this book. I'm frequently asked how I came to write this book, and I've often told an anecdote about virtual reality. See Chapter 1 for the full story. However, in reality, this is only part of the complex story that led me to write the simulation hypothesis. Like many of my readers and listeners, I came to the conclusion that life and the universe as we know it was a kind of video game intuitively. This was well before I had even heard the terms simulation hypothesis, simulation argument, or matrix hypothesis. Also, I wasn't always sure of the best way to articulate this insight, since it didn't come from just one field, but from my experience across many different threads of my life, including technology progress, video game fidelity, mystical episodes, scriptural sources, and scientific exploration. These, I realized after I wrote the book, were simply the threads of my life, and the thing that tied them together was just my innate curiosity. Science fiction played a significant role too, and it went beyond the Matrix. The idea of writing first an article and then later a book about the world being a video game crystallized while I was visiting the island country of Sri Lanka. I decided to see the well-preserved office of sci-fi legend Arthur C. Clarke. Clarke's office, which is technically not open to the public, can be visited by any true fan by slipping some rupees to the guard while explaining to them how far you've come and what a big fan of Clarke you are. It was in Clarke's office that I got a concrete inspirational nudge. I found that I couldn't take my eyes off of the bookshelves behind his desk, which contained multiple translations of his numerous books, including 2001: A Space Odyssey and 2010: Odyssey 2. During that trip, I started writing an article about the reasons why I thought we were inside not just a computer simulation, but a video game, and I finished it quickly. The article went viral, and I began to think about how I could turn it into a full book, but as usual, I got distracted with other projects. It would take a health crisis and many months before I got serious about finishing the book. As I recovered from this health crisis, I found I had just enough energy to take an Uber to the local Starbucks every day and do a few hours of writing. Rather than tiring me out, the writing energized me and made me happy. I took this as a clue that it was time for me to fulfill my lifelong dream of being a writer. I finished the manuscript with barely enough time to publish it by the 20th anniversary of the release of The Matrix on March 31st, 2019. Shortly after, I was invited to Google's headquarters to give a talk on my ideas, which, as I said earlier, bridged the gap between traditional technology discussions and those of religion and metaphysics. The Google talk, along with the news story about the book, went viral, with one site suddenly calling me the high priest of the simulation. Foreign publishers began asking to translate it, and it was clear from the tens of thousands of readers of the book and numerous emails I received that the simulation hypothesis was an idea whose time had come. Why a second edition?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?